She was just walking home, until two officers accused her of trespassing in her own neighborhood. They didn't know who she was, or who her son was. What happened next left the entire street stunned. Use this for the first 15 to 25 seconds of your video. Delivered with calm but rising intensity, the sun had just begun to dip beneath the rooftops of the quiet suburban neighborhood, casting a soft orange glow across the streets. It was the kind of peaceful evening Miss Geraldine James looked forward to. At 74 years old, she enjoyed her daily routine. A slow walk to the corner store, picking up a few groceries, chatting with the cashier, and taking the long way back home just to enjoy the calm air. That evening, she wore a light blue cardigan, a faded floral dress, and the same white sneakers she'd worn for years. In one hand, she held her cloth grocery bag, and in the other, her walking cane. Geraldine had lived in the neighborhood for more than 4 decades. She raised her 3 children in the small brick house on Maplewood Street. She knew every neighbor, every tree, every crack in the sidewalk. She had seen the area change over the years, newer homes, younger faces, and fewer people who looked like her. But she never imagined that one day she'd be seen as a stranger on her own street. As she slowly rounded the final block before her house, a loud screech startled her. A police SUV pulled up beside her, abruptly braking at the curb. 2 white officers jumped out, their boots hitting the pavement with urgency. Geraldine blinked in confusion, clutching her cane as they stormed toward her. "You, stop right there," one of them barked. He was tall, buzz-cut, and wore a hard expression. "Excuse me?" Geraldine replied, genuinely confused. She paused mid-step and looked up. "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" the second officer asked, a shorter, stockier man with mirrored sunglasses, even though the sun was nearly gone. "I'm walking home," she said slowly, trying to keep her voice calm. The tall officer narrowed his eyes. "Where's your ID?" Geraldine opened her grocery bag, her hands shaking slightly. "It's in here. I live right over there." She pointed to a small red house just a few doors down. "Don't reach," the stocky officer snapped, his hand moving toward his holster. I'm just getting my wallet," she said, frozen in place. "You asked for my ID." "Whose house is that?" the tall one demanded, pointing in the direction she had motioned to. "Mine. I've lived there since 1983, she said, her voice a little less steady. They didn't believe her. One officer took the bag from her hand and dumped it on the ground. Apples, canned goods, and a loaf of bread rolled across the sidewalk. Geraldine gasped. "That's my food. Please don't." "Looks suspicious," the shorter one said, ignoring her. "Might be shoplifted." "I have the receipt," she replied, now nearly pleading. But neither of them cared. They had made a decision before they even stepped out of the car. She didn't belong here. The taller officer stepped closer. "We've had reports of trespassers in the area. You match the description." "What description?" she asked quietly. "Of an old lady with a cane and a bag of groceries." The officer ignored her sarcasm and demanded again that she present identification. With shaking hands, she handed over her license. He snatched it and stared at it for a moment, then turned to his partner and says she lives here. Still doesn't look right. Geraldine felt heat rise to her face, not from guilt or fear, but from sheer humiliation. A lifetime of dignity was being stripped away in minutes. She had worked as a librarian for over 30 years. She paid her taxes. She helped her neighbors. She raised a lawyer, a teacher, and a nurse. And here she was treated like a criminal for walking home from the store. A couple from across the street peeked out from behind their porch railing. Another man stood near his mailbox, arms folded, watching silently. No one said a word. No one came forward. They all just watched. Geraldine's legs grew weak, so she slowly lowered herself onto the curb. The officers kept talking, radioing something in. One of them took a photo of her license with his phone. The other continued questioning her about where she was going, what she had bought, and why she was out so late. It was barely past 7. "I don't know what you think I've done," she said softly, exhausted, "but I haven't broken any law. I just want to go home." "We'll decide that," the tall officer snapped. "You'll stay right there until we verify everything." Her grocery items lay scattered. Her walking cane rested beside her, untouched. She felt more fragile than she had in years, not because of her age, but because her humanity was being denied in real time. She could feel the judgment in their eyes, the way they looked through her rather than at her, like she was invisible, or worse, like she was guilty by default. Then, far down the street, a silver car pulled up fast, then parked hard along the curb. The driver's door flew open, and that's when everything started to change. The car door slammed shut, and a man in a crisp charcoal gray suit stormed across the sidewalk. His expression was one of disbelief laced with restrained fury. Geraldine looked up and instantly felt her heart lift. It was her son, Marcus James, the youngest of her 3 children, a Harvard-educated civil rights attorney known for his no-nonsense courtroom demeanor and relentless pursuit of justice. "Mom," he shouted, rushing toward her. His tie flapped against his chest as he crouched down beside her. "What happened?" She tried to answer, but her voice cracked. "They said, I don't belong here." Marcus turned his head slowly and looked up at the 2 officers with a piercing stare. He stood, straightened his suit jacket, and faced them head-on. "Which one of you laid a hand on my mother?" he asked, his voice deadly calm. The taller officer scoffed. "This your mother? We got reports of a suspicious person. She wasn't cooperating." "She's 74, Marcus said, taking a step closer. "And she lives 2 houses down. So what exactly was the threat here?" The stockier officer shifted uncomfortably. "She didn't show ID when we first asked. And—" "That's a lie," Geraldine interrupted from the curb. "I tried. You told me not to reach." Marcus held up a hand gently to quiet her. "I have it now, Mom. I've got you." He turned back to the officers, pulling his phone from his inner coat pocket and pointing it directly at them. The camera light blinked on. "State your names and badge numbers," he said, still filming. "You can't film us without consent," the shorter officer barked. "Actually, I can. We're on a public sidewalk," Marcus replied coldly. "And I'm filming this for legal purposes. You've just unlawfully detained a senior citizen, searched her belongings without probable cause, and threatened her while she was trying to comply. So again, badge numbers." Now, the taller officer stiffened. "You got a problem. Take it up with the department." "Oh, I will," Marcus snapped. "And I'll be doing it from the courthouse. This isn't just misconduct. It's abuse of power, racial profiling, and a violation of her civil rights. You better pray those body cams are running, and you better pray they didn't mysteriously malfunction." A small crowd had started to gather across the street, some neighbors, a few passers-by. Phones were out. People were filming. The officers noticed. The energy shifted. Geraldine watched as the 2 officers seemed to second-guess their posture. The smugness in their faces was starting to melt away, replaced by a shade of nervousness. They weren't used to being challenged, especially not like this, and definitely not by someone who knew the law better than they did. "She looked like a threat to you?" Marcus asked, stepping to the side, so they could both see his mother sitting weakly on the sidewalk, a grandmother with groceries and a cane. "We were responding to a call," the taller one muttered, now avoiding eye contact. "Well, that call didn't give you permission to humiliate a senior citizen on her own street," Marcus growled. "Did you even check if she needed help, or were you too busy flexing your authority?" Silence. Geraldine's eyes welled up. She had never seen Marcus like this before, not in person. On TV, yes. In clips shared by his firm when he'd won difficult cases. But here he was protecting her not in front of a judge, but on the cold sidewalk where she had been made to feel like less than a person. And suddenly, everything inside her cracked. "I'm tired," she whispered. Marcus turned to her instantly. "I'm tired of being afraid to walk in a neighborhood I've called home longer than those two have probably been alive." He knelt beside her again. "We're going to make this right. I promise you." One of the neighbors, a middle-aged Latina woman, walked forward and helped pick up Geraldine's scattered groceries. "I saw the whole thing," she told Marcus quietly. "If you need a witness, I'll give a statement." Another man nodded. "Me too." Marcus offered a tight nod of gratitude, then turned back to the officers one final time. "You've just made a mistake that's going to cost this city. And your careers." With that, he helped his mother to her feet slowly, careful not to rush her. He handed her the cane, secured the bag over his shoulder, and wrapped his arm protectively around her. As they walked away, the crowd slowly dispersed. The officers stayed planted, radioing something back in, trying to pretend they still had control. But the truth was they had lost it the second they underestimated the woman on that sidewalk. By the time Marcus got his mother settled on her living room couch, her hands were still trembling. He gently laid a blanket over her legs, poured a glass of water, and placed her favorite jazz vinyl on the player. The soothing notes of Coltrane filled the room, but it did little to calm the fire still smoldering inside him. Geraldine clutched her son's hand. "You didn't have to come so fast," she said softly. "Yes, I did," he replied without hesitation. "Because they didn't just disrespect you. They disrespected everything I've worked to fight against. This doesn't stop here." He kissed her forehead and stepped into the kitchen, phone in hand. He opened the video he'd recorded, the entire confrontation, every smug smirk, every weak excuse. His fingers hovered above the screen before he tapped upload. Caption: "Police harass my 74-year-old mother in front of her own house. I'm her son, and I'm also her lawyer. This won't end quietly. Hashtag justice for Geraldine. Hashtag racial profiling. Hashtag civil rights." He posted it on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, every platform that mattered. Within an hour, his inbox began to explode. By midnight, the video had reached over 2 million views. Social media was on fire. Activists began resharing the clip with hashtags like hashtag hands off our elders and hashtag not one more. Influencers, local politicians, and even celebrities chimed in, expressing outrage. The footage was raw, real, and damning. The cold way the officers treated Geraldine, and the power in Marcus's calm confrontation, it lit something up in people. It wasn't just another viral moment. It was personal. By morning, national news had picked it up. CNN aired a segment titled, "Son of Elderly Woman Speaks Out After Police Confrontation Goes Viral." Marcus sat beside Geraldine in their living room as a reporter conducted a live interview. She wore a powder blue shawl and spoke slowly but firmly. "I was scared, but I wasn't surprised," she said. "This has happened to people who look like me forever, but it's different when it's you." Marcus chimed in, "This isn't about anger. This is about accountability. Those officers acted like bullies, and they need to answer for that." By that afternoon, the mayor issued a public statement expressing concern and promising a full investigation. The police department released a vague note saying they were reviewing the incident and had placed both officers on administrative leave. But Marcus knew better than to celebrate that. That was just PR damage control. 3 days later, the pressure mounted to a boil. Community members gathered outside the precinct in peaceful protest. Local activists held signs that read, "Elderly lives matter." Protect our mothers, not your ego. Police don't get to intimidate us anymore. Geraldine stayed home, but watched it all unfold on TV, tears in her eyes. I never thought I'd live to see people fight for me like this, she whispered. Marcus stood at the podium at the protest. His voice was sharp, his words piercing. We're here because enough is enough. Because our elders shouldn't have to explain their existence on their own porches. Because every black mother deserves dignity. And because these officers thought they could get away with it. Until the truth came out. The crowd erupted in applause. That night, the city council called for a public review of policing policies regarding stops involving elderly and minority residents. Journalists unearthed other complaints about the same officers, silent reports that were brushed under the rug. Patterns began to emerge. Marcus knew it was the perfect time to strike. He filed a civil rights lawsuit against the department, not just for damages, but to force structural change. Community oversight, mandatory de-escalation training, penalties for officers with repeated racial bias complaints. It wasn't just about his mother anymore. It was about everyone who had suffered in silence. Back at home, Geraldine finally smiled for the first time in days. Do you think they'll really change? She asked. Marcus knelt beside her again, like he did that day on the sidewalk. I think we already are the change, he said, and now they have no choice but to follow. She reached out and touched his face. You were always my quiet boy, she chuckled. Now look at you, loud enough for the whole country. He laughed softly. Maybe, but I learned how to be strong from you. The old record crackled softly in the background, the saxophone humming low like the heartbeat of a new movement rising from one woman's pain. Geraldine leaned back, eyes closed, knowing one truth more clearly than ever before. She wasn't invisible anymore. By the end of the week, the city was talking about Geraldine James like she was a local legend, the grandmother who stood her ground, and the mother who raised a lion. But the truth was, Geraldine hadn't asked for any of it. She hadn't wanted to go viral, become a symbol, or appear on television screens. All she had wanted was to get home with her groceries in peace. Yet now, she found herself in the center of a national conversation, and not by choice. Marcus understood that, and it's why he shielded her from most of the noise. Reporters kept calling. Activists wanted her to speak at rallies. Politicians offered photo ops. But Marcus said no to most of them. He didn't want his mother used as a token. If there was going to be change, it would be on their terms, with their story told their way. But behind the scenes, the pressure was growing. The city's police union began fighting back, calling Marcus opportunistic and accusing the media of twisting the story. One of the officers, Officer Langley, the taller one, even gave an anonymous interview claiming that Geraldine had been aggressive and uncooperative. That was the final straw. Marcus went back on national television the next morning. You want to paint my mother as a threat, he said, his voice calm but electric. A 74-year-old woman who needed help crossing the sidewalk is now your excuse for abuse? Shame on you. If this is how you protect, then maybe you're in the wrong profession. Clips from his interview exploded online. Even prominent civil rights leaders began tagging the city's mayor and police chief directly, demanding disciplinary action and reform. And that's when something shifted. City Hall requested a meeting with Marcus and his legal team. Behind closed doors, they offered a quiet settlement, a check with more zeros than Marcus had ever seen offered in a civil case. But Marcus refused. This isn't about money, he told them. It's about culture. And if you don't fix what caused this, the next check you write will be 100 times bigger, to someone else. Instead, he laid out a civil rights demands list. Full termination of both officers, a public apology to his mother, independent civilian review board with legal authority, mandatory de-escalation, and anti-bias training, quarterly public reporting of officer misconduct. City officials tried to push back. They claimed it was too much. Marcus didn't blink. "This city doesn't need another PR stunt," he said. "It needs a reckoning." Meanwhile, at home, Geraldine kept receiving handwritten letters from elderly women in Detroit, from teenagers in Baltimore, from single fathers in Texas. Strangers wrote about how they had watched the video and wept, not just for her, but for what they saw in themselves. "You're my grandma now, too," one note said. Another simply read, "Thank you for surviving." She kept every letter in a shoebox next to her bed. One evening, as the autumn wind brushed against the windows, Geraldine asked her son a question she'd been holding back. "Do you think God let this happen for a reason?" Marcus thought about it for a long moment. "Maybe," he said, "maybe he knew the city needed to hear a voice it couldn't ignore." She nodded slowly. "I just didn't want to be that voice. I'm tired." "You've done enough," he said. "Now let me finish the fight." 2 days later, the city folded. The police department issued a public statement acknowledging a clear violation of protocol and basic human decency. Both officers were terminated, and the mayor, in front of a room packed with press and citizens, formally apologized to Geraldine James, calling her a reminder of the strength and grace our city owes its deepest respect to. Marcus stood beside her as she accepted the apology, but not the spotlight. She spoke only a few words. "I forgive you, but forgiveness doesn't erase responsibility." The room fell silent. That quote alone became a headline. From that moment on, something truly began to change. The new Civilian Review Board was formed. Officers were required to complete anti-bias training by year's end. Community policing programs expanded. And perhaps most importantly, the city passed a local ordinance, now known as the Geraldine Act, which protects elderly residents from unjustified stops and ensures all ID checks follow proper protocol. Marcus never wanted his mother to be in this position, but now that she was, he made sure her pain built something lasting, something permanent. And Geraldine, she went back to her routine. She still took her walks, still went to the corner store. But now, when people passed her, they didn't look past her. They stopped. They smiled. Some even thanked her. She was no longer just Miss Geraldine from Maplewood Street. She was a mother who reminded the world, don't mess with someone who raised a fighter. 6 months had passed since the day Geraldine James was stopped and humiliated on that sidewalk. But what happened after had grown into something bigger than anyone could have imagined. It started with headlines, protests, and interviews. But in the months that followed, it turned into policies, reform, and conversations that hadn't been had in decades. What began as a moment of injustice evolved into a movement, and at the heart of it all was one elderly woman and her determined son. Geraldine never saw herself as a hero. To her, she was just a mother who raised her boy to stand tall, and a citizen who expected to be treated with dignity. But the truth was, her courage to remain calm, to not give in to fear or rage in the face of blatant disrespect, had captured the country's attention. People watched the video not just to witness injustice, but to witness grace under pressure. Even Marcus, who had stood beside hardened judges and vicious prosecutors, found himself humbled by what came after. He thought he was going to court to defend his mother's rights. Instead, he ended up building a blueprint for other cities to follow. He was invited to speak at law schools, civil rights panels, and even the U.S. Justice Department. But no matter where he went, he always started the same way. It started with a walk my mother had taken 100 times before. Back home, Geraldine had returned to her quiet life. She still went to the store every Tuesday, still said hello to the same cashier, still paused at the crosswalk and waited for the light to change. But now, neighbors greeted her differently. Children pointed her out to their parents. Some people even called her Miss Rosa in quiet reference to Rosa Parks, though Geraldine would always shake her head and say, "No, child, I just wanted to get home." But she understood what they meant. She had become a symbol, not by choice, but by courage, and that walk had shaken the system. Not all change came quickly, of course. There were still officers who rolled their eyes at the new training. Still people online who posted comments blaming Geraldine, twisting the facts, calling it race baiting or overreacting. But for every ugly comment, there were 100 voices saying, "Enough. We see the truth now. We're not going backward." And then came the day the city unveiled a bronze plaque by that very sidewalk. It read, "In honor of Geraldine James, whose walk home lit the way forward. Let no one's dignity be optional." Geraldine didn't attend the ceremony at first. She told Marcus she didn't need that kind of attention, but the mayor personally invited her. And when she saw the small crowd, not reporters, not politicians, just neighbors, school kids, elders in wheelchairs, and young mothers holding babies, she knew this wasn't about politics anymore. It was about legacy. So she walked, just like she always did. Except this time, she walked beside her son. No police officers harassed her. No one blocked her path. And when she crossed the exact spot where she'd once been stopped and humiliated, she paused, looked at the plaque, then smiled. "Let's keep going," she said softly. "It's just a sidewalk. I got places to be." Marcus looked over at his mother and smiled too. The strength in her voice, even now, still amazed him. For all the law he had studied, all the cases he had won, he realized something. The real fight for justice isn't always in courtrooms. Sometimes it starts on a quiet street with an old woman carrying groceries and ends with a city learning how to listen. That night, Geraldine sat in her favorite chair, her cat purring on her lap, and Marcus nearby scrolling through his phone. He read her comments from around the world, messages from South Africa, Brazil, England, Canada, people inspired by her strength, people sharing stories of their own mothers, their own battles, their own sons who'd stood up for them. It was overwhelming, but also healing. Marcus looked over at her. "You really changed something, Ma." Geraldine chuckled. "I didn't change nothing. I just reminded folks what respect looks like." He smiled. "Yeah, but that reminder echoed everywhere." And it did, because sometimes history doesn't happen in grand speeches or big battles. Sometimes history walks down a sidewalk, gets stopped for no reason, and chooses to stand tall instead of shrinking. Sometimes the most ordinary people carry the power to create extraordinary change. All it takes is one walk,